and welcome to the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast. It's the podcast where a filmmaker, a comedian, and their fabulous guests revisit the 80s movies we think we love or might have missed with our modern eyes to see how they hold up, discuss what they're all about. And today is going to be a real doozy. We are watching Risky Business, a movie selection from 1983.
So your folks are going out of town.
Just use your best judgment. You know we trust you.
You got the place all to yourself? A good time, Joe. In the privacy of your own home.
Just take those old records off the shelf.
That's her. She's fantastic. Yeah.
I sit and listen to them by myself.
Did you have a good time last night?
I had a great time.
Today's music ain't got the same soul.
You ever get high, Joe?
Don't let me do anything stupid. Don't worry.
I like that old time rock and roll.
Who's the U-boat commander?
Don't try to take me to a disco.
I don't remember giving permission for a party, Joe.
A party?
I still like that old time rock and roll.
I've got a trig midterm tomorrow and I'm being chased by Guido, the killer pimp.
Kind of music just soothes the soul.
Doesn't anyone want to accomplish anything, or do we just want to make money?
Make money. Make a lot of money.
That old time rock and roll.
There's a time for playing it safe,
Rock and roll.
and a time for risky business.
I think that's another example of kind of a weird trailer where they're really not capturing what the movie is, which admittedly with this movie would be a struggle. So they're kind of like choosing moments that make it seem like it's going to be an 80s sex comedy, which it definitely isn't.
Yeah, it's much more this isn't the movie. This is during the age of like crazy sex comedies of guys just trying to get some. And he quote gets some really early on, and it's really more about, it's really a story told by, rather than a horny teenager, it's a story told by an adult, and it almost feels like someone looking back on their life. It almost feels like an adaptation of like a novel, of someone, that adult character looking back 20 years on a time in his life. Because it's really more of to reuse it, an adult story of a character who is just twisting himself in and out with guilt and doubt and fear, and kind of putting on these sunglasses and creating an alter ego.
Yeah. Well, that voice is filmmaker Nathan Blackwell, who is, with us as always here on the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast.
Good to be here.
And we have a very exciting special guest today. Podcaster extraordinaire, host of the Superhero Ethics podcast, where Nathan and I recently guested, and the host of the Star Wars Universe podcast. Hello, Matthew.
Hello, I'm really glad to be here with y'all.
And I as well. I probably would never have chosen this movie if not for your unique take on exploring ethics in superhero movies. There's probably a bit more fun to it than in movies about teen prostitution, which also isn't necessarily what this movie is about. But just really quickly before we get all the way in it, I wanted to ask you, Nathan, what is going on with your current production, the last movie ever made?
Right. We finished half of the production. I think I mentioned this on Back to the Future.
Mhm.
And we were going to shoot the other half, but we had to stop because of Omicron. We
Omicron. It's like an
damn you,
angry.
damn
It's
you, an angry transformer destroying
That's
our
exactly
worlds.
it. Yeah.
Um, yeah. We wanted to we do our due diligence, and we want to make sure everyone's safe. We test everyone before we start shooting, and we had some positives, and so we had to put a pause, and everyone and their neighbor was being affected by Omicron, and so
Mhm.
we've had to reschedule, but we're going to be shooting again at the end of February.
Awesome. I mean, a lot can happen in a production, and certainly when there's a highly contagious um, sickness going around, it's something to take into consideration. So,
Yeah, you can't. I mean, it was like one of those situations you can't even be upset because the people who did get Omicron, luckily it was not bad. They were vaccinated, and they were super careful, and
mhm.
it was like it was one of those things that either they got it while they were masked or something happened at the grocery store, who knows, but they were being super careful about it, and they still got it. Luckily, they're doing just fine. Um, but yeah, it's literally like one of those act of God things that
Yeah.
you can't. It's like you can't. You can be upset that someone rear-ended your car, but it's one of those things you can't control. So you can only get so worked up about it. It's just
For sure.
literally the fact of trying to do anything in the state that the world is right now.
I'm just coming off my own bout with Omicron, so I'll apologize in advance
Mm,
to you all that you may have to edit out some coughing or a raspy voiceness. But yeah, it's just we did all we could to be as careful as possible, but these things still happen.
yeah.
Absolutely. But you know what? It is really difficult and challenging to be trying to make something in the world as it is today, and with the challenges we're facing today. And so, I salute you, Nathan, for still being willing to try and getting out there and making something new, and all the people who are helping your production. So it's going to be amazing when it does get made, and I know everybody's going to love it. So I'm excited and hopeful for when it gets to be shot again.
Yeah. I can't wait. That'll be nice.
Yay.
It's one of those weird things to where I was incredibly disappointed when we had to postpone it, but I was also like enormously relieved that I got to sleep in and just play video games the next day.
Aw.
It's like that weird thing. I was just like, yay, I don't have to do anything. I can just curl up and hide.
I
Hooray.
don't have to go do that thing that is my lifelong dream. Yeah, I feel you on that,
Exactly.
Nathan. It's a
That,
hard time to be an improv comedy theater owner, so I
mhm.
feel you. I feel you.
That's the thing,
Um,
is that, it's like lifelong dreams. Like, you use that phrase, and it's like, it sounds like, oh, fantastic. You're just running through an orchard and picking up the best fruit. Instead, it's like, it's the hardest thing, and everything about it you want to just scream and escape from, because it deals with so many, like, so much fear.
yeah,
And,
exactly. Okay. Risky Business. I have never seen this movie. I watched it for the first time for this podcast today, because I knew the plot of it, and I knew the cliches of it. And so I thought I knew what this movie was, and I just assumed that it would not be for me. But this movie is not at all what I thought it was.
Right.
yeah, 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 it turns out to be much more mature and interesting than I think its reputation is, or at least not, maybe not reputation, but our assumption
Yeah,
of
I,
what
Yeah,
it
well,
is.
I have to admit, I went through kind of a journey with this movie. And you all were talking earlier about, like, is it a sex comedy? Is it something much more serious? I saw this movie for the first time when I was maybe like 11 or 12. And
Oh,
so I
dang.
saw it as just like, wow, that's the teenage life that I want to have. That seems like the dream. And for context, one thing that's important to know is I went to, like, one of the things I think is so fascinating about this movie is that they live in a world where, if you don't go to the Ivy League, if you go to just, the University of Illinois, which by the way is a very good school, your life is ruined.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in New York City. I got scholarships to private schools. So I lived in a world that was very similar to that. So like growing up, I was just like, yeah, this makes total sense. I get it. I'm 12. Look at all the pretty girls. I love this. I probably watched it one more time when I was a teenager. And then as the years passed, I started to think a lot more negatively about it and think, God, what a ridiculous movie. Like, it's all such a, Reaganite upper middle class dream that has no understanding of like the real world. And when I suggested it to you all, I figured we were going to have a great time ripping it apart for being horribly sexist and horribly classist and like, to all white kids and just all of these things about how this idea that this should be the aspirational life. And so when I watched it again and realized, wait a minute, the writers know all the things that I think are problematic about this movie, and that's the point. It's satire. It's pointing out all the ridiculousness of teenagers growing up this way and the cultures involved. I realized we were going to have a very different discussion than what I thought we were going to have, and I was really excited about that.
Yeah, exactly what you said. It much better than I did, Matthew. Even the taglines and the like short summaries are like, Joel's parents are out of town and he's gonna make some money with prostitutes. Like, that's what you think the movie is, and I guess it is, but it's way more about what does it mean to make money? Is that the only goal of your life? Like, and this movie is way more sex positive than even like another ethically murky movie that we have done recently, 16 Candles. So there is a lot to unpack. Did you see this movie as a kid, Nathan?
No, I probably caught this somewhere in my 20s. I don't know. I don't even remember the exactly when and where, but I know I've seen it before, and I saw it past my teenage years.
Right.
But no, this isn't one that necessarily I grew up on. It's like the kind of like sex comedies were more the kind of stuff that we think of, we associate with, is like the Meatballs-esque kind of stuff, where it's like like the C level movies with Michael J. Fox and and things like that. Just like I've got to have it kind of stuff. Like Weird Science and things like that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think of now that I have a better understanding of it, I think of this movie very similar to another great 80s movie that I wonder if you all have covered, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which is the same thing. Like, I saw it when I was a teenager. I didn't really get much out of it except Phoebe Katz looks really good in a bikini. And then went back and watched later and was like, oh no, this isn't one of those sex comedies. This is very much a critique of that, and I mean, Fast Times I think is less a satire and more just a like, here's how all this is broken and wrong. But I know that came out a year before this, and so I have to imagine this was inspired by that in some ways, because I don't think the marketing is accidental. Like, I'm totally projecting here, but I imagine they wanted people to think it was a sex comedy and then have to have it does work on the level of a sex comedy if you're just watching it on that level. But if you actually think about it, it's kind of just a critique of the whole sex comedy idea. And I just love that.
Yeah. Plus they had to get people out of their houses and to come see it. So that was probably an easier sell.
Oh, for sure. But even the moments of comedy are not like, this movie has jokes, but it has very funny moments, which in different hands would be a very funny, you know, like I was thinking like, oh, this could be a Better Off Dead type, you know, jokey movie if
Right.
it wanted to be, because some of the jokes are really could be in a different director, a different actor's hands, just like wah slapstick, you know, when he's like his friends come over while he's doing homework and they're like, we heard your parents are out of town and we would like to use this time to take the bullet train to Pound Town if you don't mind. And he's like, yeah, go ahead. And then he's like, ugh, I can't concentrate. I'm gonna leave. Grunt twice if you will lock the door on your way out, you know. And then there's like ridiculous sex noise, but it's like, okay, I guess they'll lock the door. You know, there's really funny, like the moment where he's riding the Porsche as it is about to crash into Lake Michigan. Like it's there for laughs, and it is funny, and it's a joke, and it's a bit. And if you just read the script, you would be literally picturing the height of silliness and like winking at the audience. They're not winking at all. And they're, you know, this movie made me think of just maybe like the tone or the feel or whatever, almost of The Graduate, of like a person who's like, I don't know what to do with myself. And I feel like I'm supposed to want these things. And he like he feels lost. So like I think Tom Cruise's acting is really great in this movie, and of course Rebecca De Mornay is incredible, and the directing is really like he's making moves here, the director of this movie.
And I think it's awesome that you bring up Better Off Dead, because I think Better Off Dead, you're right, is very much in that kind of like romantic comedy, will the loser teen guy get the girl? But I think it's probably the absolute best example of that genre. But in that movie, the actor Curtis Armstrong plays, you know, our John Cusack's best friend, and is just this ridiculous character who's who's sort of giving the hero advice, but always saying ridiculous things, and is never treated as a real person. He's just like this kind of plot and joke machine. The same actor plays the very good friend of Tom Cruise's character in this, and again is like he's the instigator. He's the one who calls the sex worker for the first time to get them over. He's the one who pushes Joel, you know, to move forward, with him constantly being the one to say, sometimes you just got to say, what the F. And then there's a scene where they get into trouble with the pimp of Rebecca De Mornay, and that character is along for the ride, and you see him be scared. And you see him realize that all this nonsense advice he's been giving doesn't work. And I was like, oh, that's the level that the Better Off Deads never go to, you know? And I was like, okay, that's what I think it was so fascinating. That's the same actor, because he's playing a very similar role, but then you get to go see like, what are the consequences of this in a way a Better Off Dead would never show you.
Yeah. It suddenly becomes human. Yeah.
Such a great I didn't even realize when I was making that own comparison to myself that, of course, Booger from The Nerds is in both movies. Of course he is. And having a very different experience in each one, I'm sure. So this is the story that they tell you. It is the story of a young man who's he's Tom Cruise, who is not yet anything special. He's been in The Outsiders and Taps and, you know, a couple other things, but he is certainly not anybody at all yet. And the director didn't even want him for this movie. He sort of had to convince the director that he could play this role. And I think he does play it amazingly. You can see like the Tom Cruisiness that's there, like the raw Tom Cruisiness that's there. But like I read that he lost a bunch of weight and then gained a bunch of weight so that he would have that sort of soft, pampered, baby fat look that he has in this movie. And he does a perfect job of not being, he's not the kids from Pretty in Pink. He's not the kids from 16 Candles. He's not an entitled, and I'm not saying he isn't entitled, but he's not the, you know, you think of James Spader's character from 16 Candles, who's just like a complete slime ball. That's not him. He wants to do his homework while his friends are banging upstairs.
Right.
And he keeps doing his home. Like, he's still trying to get his homework done while Rebecca De Mornay is like walking around his house with barely any clothes on. He's like, look, I just got to get this homework done. He's not overconfident monster. He is shy. He is, I don't know, he is unsure of himself.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I get most from his character is the fear, you know, and to me, and granted, in part because I come from the kind of a world that Joel is existing in, maybe I have more sympathy for that. But I think the movie is meaning, I don't think the movie is meaning to make us just be sympathetic to Joel, but also kind of realize Joel is in this ridiculously privileged, entitled position where he has these horrible blinders on, because it's his constant fear throughout the movie is your life will be ruined, you know? And it's this part of that is because and I think the movie does a great job of kind of like letting you see this without hitting you over the head with it. He lives in a world where everything has been scripted for him. You know, he's supposed to do all these classes, do all these things, take the SATs so that he can go to an Ivy League school, major in business, and then go on to have, you know, the great career. And so much of this is about is that feeling that he has where if he deviates from that in the slightest, his life is ruined. You know, if he has sex with a teenage girl and gets caught, his life is going to be ruined. The police are going to come. The father is going to come. If he doesn't get into Princeton, you know, one of the most exclusive colleges in the world, and he only goes to the University of Illinois, his life is ruined. Like, and I remember watching that moment, I keep focusing on because that really hit me so hard of just thinking, like, how many people would watch this movie and go, what are you talking about? Like, there's nothing wrong with going to your state college. That's a great thing to do. Even going to college, especially in the 80s, was something that by no means everyone was doing.
Yeah.
And I think to me, that's kind of one of the, I think you're right. He's shy. He's not the horn dog, although he's definitely able to be led around by that, but once he gets, you know, sexually initiated. But more than anything, he's just so afraid. He's so terrified that if he doesn't do everything he's been told, his life won't turn out exactly like it's been planned, which means his life is ruined.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the scene that represents that, you know, his like emotional being is the scene where the car, like it normally, like where the Porsche, his dad's Porsche, is slowly rolling down the hill and then rolls onto the dock. And it's not like a quick moment. It is a moment to where he has so much time to push against it and to freak out, but he is unable to stop it. He is unable to stop it. He keeps going. He's yelling for help. He's pushing. There's nothing he could do. The keys are locked inside. And he is just watching the whole thing more or less in his mind in slow motion. And it's just all the panic and knowing that his life is going to end if anything happens to this car and he cannot stop it.
But you don't get that. You know, here are two films about somebody who damages their parents' car that they love more than the child, perhaps, you know, but we don't get that Ferris Bueller feeling, you know, that we get from this. Like, he's not a Ferris Bueller who's like, what's the worst, you know, what's the worst? He's like, oh my God, what's the worst, you know? And here he is at home alone, and his friends are like, get a hooker, have a party, drive the car. And he's like, no, I'm going to continue raking these leaves. Thank you very much.
This is a movie about Cameron instead of being the movie about Ferris.
Yes, exactly that. And I did read in the like trivia that the layout of this city is that Cameron's house would be around the corner from Joel's house. So they're the two kids who got all the anxiety that this 80s money-centric lifestyle puts out, and not the other things that we see. So Booger from the Nerds, of course, does call a hooker, or, you know, a sex worker from the back pages of the newspaper, and has them sent over to Joel's. And, you know, of course, he's just like, he's at home eating TV dinners and doing his homework and doing his chores like a good boy when this sex worker shows up. And even this moment, I was so surprised, was not played for a joke, because the sex worker that shows up is a trans woman.
Right.
And they don't point and laugh at it as much as I feel like they would have in another movie.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Cause I remember that scene with some like kind of fear, you know, as I got close to it. I was wondering, would this be the super awkward, you know, making fun of a trans person, make the fact that also she's black, you know, so like, you know, the black transgender sexual woman is often like sort of the height of the kind of like gay panic fear, you know, not that gayness and transgender are connected, but just that the homophobic, transphobic kind of the way they tie in together. That's very often the laugh line of the like, how do you get the bully? You know, you get the bully by, you know, getting him drunk enough that he wants to hit on this, you know, black trans woman, and then you can embarrass him about it. Like I'm sure that's, I don't remember exactly which ones, but I know that that's a plot line I've seen in a number of these 80s movies. And
it happens in Crocodile Dundee, where he meets a woman in a bar and thinks that he's having a good time, and his friend, the cab driver, is like, well, just so you know, that is a trans person. And then it's played for a huge joke, and it's a real bummer.
Yeah. Thank you. That's definitely one of them. And what I like here is that to some extent it is played as a joke, but the joke is at Joel's expense, not hers. Because the point is more that he is terrified of her. But in part, he's also terrified of, I think a big part of what he's terrified about is being rude to her. Like, he wants to be super polite. He wants to be nice to this person who, you know, just got called out for, you know, because of this idiot friend of his.
Yeah, he's just fallen into the world of adults, you know, and sex, you know, and he is terrified. It's like at the beginning of the movie where all his friends are playing like poker and they're chomping on cigars, you know, and trying to act like adult men. And oh my God, they are like literally destroying those cigars in their mouths. It's so disgusting.
It's so gross.
Mm-hmm.
As a smoker of cigars, like they are treating those things like children.
I appreciate that you noticed that, because I smoke a cigar once a year. I don't know much about them, but I've played poker for all of my life, and what I noticed is that the poker is so bad.
That's great.
But that's probably what their daddies do, and so that's what they are grooming themselves to be. But the Jackie, the sex worker in question, is very calm. Like, she's calm. She's clearly the one who's in control of this situation, and she says to Joel through the door, "Be a courageous person and open this door so that I can call a cab."
Right.
And he's just like, "You're right. I can't leave you outside." Like, and then you know, she's like, "I get it. You're just a white boy off the lake, but you need to pay me for my time and the ride I took to get out here." And, you know, he ends up paying her $75 to not bang.
Right.
And then it's that night where he is, you know, alone in his room that has in it. It has this red light in it that's a flashing checks cashed sign that I was really curious about, because I was like, does he have that ironically? You know, a check cashing blinking light place is something that you know, associate with very low rent parts of the. So why does he have it? And, you know, does he think it's funny? Anyway, it's there and it's flashing. And that's when he's like, he's so scared and afraid and sex shamed that he can't even masturbate without thinking about his parents, her parents, the police and the National Guard showing up to be like, you put your pants back on and come out here. And it's like, oh my God. That's the moment where it was really a Better Off Dead thing, where it's like he has this sort of almost a dream sequence. But then he does call Lana, which he got the number from Jackie. He was like, this is what you want. This is what all white boys on the lake
Yep.
want. Call
He does
Lana.
put on the hockey mask first.
He does, to protect
from the phone call.
himself.
Such a great moment.
And in that moment, you really feel like, oh, he's just a baby. Like, he's just a little boy in this terrible 80s world. And then, so Rebecca De Mornay does show up, and God, she's incredible, right?
Yeah.
That moment where she's in the purple dress and the door blows open. It's like, yeah, this is not a sex comedy where the boobs are presented to you like boobs. It's like, it's like really sort of sexy and really way more intimate than you'd see in a movie that's more similar to a Porky's.
I think that's really true. And it's, I mean, as I said, 12-year-old me just loved that scene. I didn't have any understanding about what was happening.
Boobs and butts, yeah.
But going back and watching it, it you know, so much of those movies, it's very objective. It's very about objectification. It's about, you know, ha ha ha. We get to like, I think it's Porky's where our heroes are all, or no, it's Revenge of the Nerds. I think where like our heroes are like drilling a hole through the wall so they can watch cheerleaders shower, and this like horribly offensive thing. This feels like, yes, Rebecca De Mornay is naked in parts of the movie and looks very, very good, but it feels so much more respectful. You know, it feels like it is all about the connection they have and how she has all the power in the situation, and she is, you know, this fantasy come to life for him. And, you know, I think even saying that, like, I think I would want to be like, I think if you made this movie today, there probably still would be some differences in how that's shot, and for good reasons. But yeah, I think it is so, it's there's an eroticism, there's a sensuality to it that is just not found in your average 80s teen sex movie by any means.
And even like they show them on the stairs, and I'm like, why would that be your choice? You're in this gigantic house, you're going to choose the stairs? Bad choice, rookie move. And then they're in a chair in like the what I assume to be the media room of the house. And I was like, okay, so a comedy would have then continued to heighten that moment and show us them banging it out, you know, in the Porsche, on the Porsche, in the pile of leaves he raked, you know, and all the, you know, all around and everywhere. But this one's just like, no, that's not what it is. They're just like, you know, and then they're having like coffee in the morning and reading the paper and chatting about real estate. And, you know, he's like, this is my parents' house. I don't own it. I have to go to school now. And she's like, cool. You owe me $300. He definitely should have checked in to find out what the bottom line was going to be. And then he's like, well, I can go cash in a bond. And like, just that piece of the puzzle was like, and later in the movie, when they do like decide to have a brothel at the house through circumstances, you see all these boys cashing in their bonds, and it's like, oh my God, like, yeah, that is the peak at privilege, which is like they all have hundreds of dollars in bonds given to them by their grandparents because that is who they are.
Yeah, and like I said, being the scholarship kid in a world like that was so, like, just so mind warping to me, because like, yeah, that was what all the people I go to high school were able to do, you know, had that kind of disposable income. And I think the thing I like most about Rebecca De Mornay's character, Lana, is that she is the one who holds up a mirror to Joel to show him how privileged he is, to show him how, like, you know, there's so many great, I think it'd be so easy to make her character one of two cliches. Either the completely irredeemable, scheming, backstabbing, she's a sex worker, so she has no morals whatsoever, she's just out to betray him and steal from him. Or the hooker with a heart of gold kind of cliche, where she doesn't want to do this, she got forced to do it for the wrong reasons, and now Joel can come in and rescue her from this terrible life she's in.
She's neither of those things. Yeah, which I was like, really took me by surprise. And I loved that piece of the puzzle. Like, there are moments there are moments where you're like, oh no, here comes the story. Oh no, here
Mhm.
comes Joel to save her.
Right.
And she is going to stay with him and they'll ride away on the lawnmower a la Can't Buy Me Love. And that doesn't happen. And she's not only is she like, look, I don't need you to save me. I don't need you to judge me. And like, she's unafraid. She's laughing as they're driving away from Guido. And she's like yelling out the window at him when they're in Joel's house. We work for Joel now. She's just like doing her own thing. And when they show us the inside of her apartment finally, that's what makes it even more clear that she's neither of those two things that you so accurately described, Matthew. She's not a villain. She's not, you know, just waiting for Richard Gere to save her from this life. Like she's like living her life, and like I'm sure she has wants and goals and desires, but like she's not trapped in the life in the way that I assumed she would have been.
Yeah. I think it's a very good way to put it. And I think, like, because on the surface, you could think that Joel rescues her because she does go to Joel for protection from Guido, which, by the way, fantastic, like, such a ridiculous character. And
old Joey Pants.
Yeah,
Joey Pants!
He then
Joe
betrays
Pantoliano!
He then betrays all of our heroes in Matrix. And he just looks so different, though.
He really does.
Right?
Like, I had to look it up. I was
younger,
like,
so much thinner.
I think that's Joe Pantoliano, but I mean, he's completely not the man we see in Goonies. So,
But what I love though about with Lana with Joel in that is that, like, she jumps from Guido to Joel as a way to get away from Guido because obviously he's not good for her. But it's 100% her using Joel. It's not Joel rescuing her. It's her seeing a better opportunity and leaping to that. And again, here, she doesn't become villainous, but she's absolutely taking advantage of Joel's innocence and naivete. And I love that because it's like, yeah, you do have all these resources. This is a person who needs your help. But she's not begging. She's never in a position where he has power over her. She has all the power and she just gets what she needs.
Yeah, and there's a scene where after she comes to, they run away from Guido. He's trying to get the egg back. So she has stolen, rather than wait for him to come back with his, war bonds or whatever it was that he's cashing. She has stolen a football-sized crystal Steuben egg that is like the mantle piece.
Right. The representation of everything that he is wound up about that his parents represent, like just like just like this glass egg that has at the end has an imperceptible crack in it that is now ruined.
Right.
And it you said it, Nathan, and I didn't think about it. Like, it's this clear glass egg. It's something that has no value except for the value that's placed upon it by its status, and that is the life he's aiming for, right? Is it like he says to his friends, do we want to make money or do we want to achieve something? And they're like, no, we just want money. We want the crystal egg to put on the mantle, this meaningless piece of glass as a display of our conquering or whatever. And she's like, well, you took too long. I stole your egg.
Kind of referencing another favorite 80s movies of mine, completely different genre, the movie Wall Street with Charlie Sheen and Michael Douglas. A lot of that movie is about these young people fresh out of business school who want to be huge economic successes. They want to play with the big dogs like Gordon Gekko, the Michael Douglas character. And watching this, especially that scene where all the kids are just like, yeah, we just want to make money. I was like, oh, these are the kids who go to business school and become the Charlie Sheen characters, and it was just like, here, this is obviously much more satirical, but that's who this is about. And there's so much it's satirizing it, but it's also just the whole, like, when you think of the Reagan era and this idea of like, just make money and who cares about whatever anything else is, and all the stock market shenanigans at the time, that's exactly what this movie's about, even though it's in a much more satirical way than like Wall Street, which is much more serious.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Wall Street is obviously a negative view of those people.
Right.
but those same people, like the whole, like speech, greed is good, is supposed to highlight what we don't like about that, but then the people who represent that use that actually as, they see it as a positive,
Right, which
as
it's kind of like Fight Club, right? Where it's like, no, 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 you're supposed to hate this and see how gross it is, and they're like, no, we love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's an interesting needle that this movie has to thread as well. Like, for the most part, we're seeing the movie through Tom Cruise's experience,
Right.
but it's a tough act to balance, of showing this thing realistically and you making your own judgments on it, and yet showing it as a positive, life-changing experience. I think ultimately running a brothel out of your parents' house is a little harder to replicate than being on Wall Street.
Well, but even the guy who runs Princeton, who's there to evaluate Joel, coincidentally on the night when he is running a brothel from his home, is only convinced that Joel is Princeton material, not based on his achievements, not based on his grades or his scores, but the fact that he's like, oh, well, clearly this kid gets it. Yeah, he doesn't even know about the Porsche or the circumstances. All he knows is that this kid is running a whorehouse while his parents are out of town. And he's like, yep, that's what makes you Princeton material, friend.
Yeah. And that to me especially was just such a great skewering of, like, as someone who I think from my high school, I went to a very good school that wasn't Ivy League. And it wasn't until I was 25 or so, that I got enough reality kicks in the head to realize I wasn't a failure because I didn't go to the Ivy League, and this skewering of the whole Ivy League culture of like, yeah, that's what would make you Princeton material is just so brilliant. And I do want to talk about the whole like brothel scene, because I think that here's where I think the movie is for the most part very respectful of both Jackie and Lana, and sex workers in general. But there's also like, if I put on too critical a lens, I do have to look at this as what this is about like on the one hand, there's this kind of wonderful aspect of like, I have a number of friends who are sex workers, and like, yeah, if you have a fantasy, like instead of trying to find someone who can like seduce it, like just paying a sex worker or a professional to help you live that out, nothing wrong with that. Absolutely go for it. I think that that scene especially is where I think it may cross into romanticizing the sex work kind of dynamics a little bit too much, just in terms of, I think I best explain this. Like that many young men with that much money, where like it's presented as the women have all of the power. I feel like in the reality that would go very badly, with some of the men like absolutely not treating the sex workers with the respect they deserve because of the money relationship. Like I feel like there's a lot more complexity that would happen, and that's the kind of most like, okay, in this fantasy world, that's how it's all going to play out. There's some economic dynamics around sexuality here that we're ignoring, but for the purpose of what we're saying in this movie, that's totally fine, because we're making all these other awesome, like sex worker positive points.
Yeah, so what I would compare it to also is that like in the movie 16 Candles, both the James Spader character and I'm mixing up Pretty in Pink and 16 Candles.
The John Hughes Brat Pack, yeah, that's gonna happen.
They're all mooshing, but the boys, the high school senior boys in that story do feel entitled to sex with the women in their lives.
Yeah.
Like she's passed out upstairs and he's like, I could violate her as much as I wanted to, but instead I'll just give her to you. And like there's no explicit money transaction. And in that movie, you've got the Anthony Michael Hall character whose entire life is based on losing his virginity. And it's like this movie sort of solves that problem of like, well, yeah, just go cash in your bond and we'll take that whole race to lose your virginity out of the equation for you. And like when he's pitching it to his friends, he's like, look, you're gonna go to college, like these women will teach you how to do sex good. And they're like, yeah, all right, that sounds nice. So it is presented in that way of like, look, I'm taking the guesswork out of this for you. And maybe that does give them a little bit of a different relationship to it than the 16 Candles of it all, where it's like, well, I've been dating you, you owe me sex.
Yeah.
In fact, they have a conversation at a diner where he's like evaluating all the money that the kid put into taking a girl out for dates and not getting laid.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, you could just spend that same money and not have to spend time with a human woman and then get laid.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the most positive arguments in favor of sex work, because the idea of like getting out of this ridiculous idea of like the money you spend in dating should be a coercive part of convincing someone to have sex. Just being like, if you want to spend money to have sex, do it in a way where it's completely negotiated, and assuming it's a safe power dynamic, it's fully consensual on both sides in a way that is very much not in the 16 Candles kind of world. Like I remember, I'm the perfect age for those, so I grew up watching those as a kid and a young teenager, and I was heartbroken in Pretty in Pink that Ducky didn't get the girl, because he's the nice guy. He's so good to her. He's pint. Doesn't he deserve Molly Ringwald? And again, it was later that I was able to look back and go, no, that movie was brilliant. That movie was recognizing that the whole nice guy gets the girl because he deserves her by just having a basic level of human respect. Like, that's nonsense. That's sexist bullshit. But forgive my language. I can edit that out if you need.
No, we say bad words around here.
Okay.
And also, speaking of sexuality, there is something that I noticed, which I thought was interesting. So the character, his friend, I can't remember. His friends are all named like Miles and Barry and Glenn. So who knows which one's Balky and which one's Booger from the Nerds? But is it Miles who is Booger from the Nerds?
Yeah, I think Miles is I found that actor's name just a minute ago.
Charles Anderson.
Yeah, Curtis. Miles is Curtis Anderson, and
Curtis
then
Anderson.
Bronson Pinchot is Barry.
Okay, I could not keep them straight. But he's the one who initially calls the sex worker who ends up being a trans woman, and then at the end they're standing outside. Joel and whichever friend that is, they're standing outside on the lawn, and the friend is like, I don't need to use your sex worker brothel. I get it for free, and I don't need this. And Joel says to him in a very tender way, like, whatever you want to do is okay with me.
Yeah.
And that to me in that moment felt like, I feel like Joel is telling him that he gets that this character is maybe gay and is okay with it. But maybe I was putting that onto it. But that was my read, is that he's like, okay, you don't want to come in and partake, and that's okay with me. And it was almost said like, hey, whatever you want to do is okay with me, and I mean, I almost wished that they would have had hey, do we have alternate sexual interests here? I've got more than just blonde women for you.
I was thinking that if this movie was made today, I think Jackie would be at that party. And you'd have a scene
that's what I wanted Jackie at the party.
Yeah, you'd have a scene where at least one or more of the boys was interested in Jackie, and then maybe one of their friends teased them, but the others shut them down. It's like, no, there's nothing wrong with it. Like Tom Cruise would shut them down. It's funny. I hadn't thought of Miles as gay at all. I think, for me, but I'm not saying you're wrong. I think it's very positive. It's a very interesting reading. To me, Miles is the guy who's all talk. And that's that whole, he wants everyone else to lead the crazy life and do the things that he's never going to do, because he has a trigonometry exam tomorrow, remember, as he keeps pointing out.
Right, and he has no time to be chased by the killer pimp.
And I think the other part of it is that there is a kind of the flip side of that thing we were talking about, is that a lot of the ideas of sort of male seduction is this idea of you're the great hunter, and so there's a victory if you seduce the character, and think about one of the things in those 80s movies often is the characters make a bet to see who can seduce the unseducible girl, but they don't sing and dance like in Guys and Dolls, the fun way to do it. But the point being, but I think in that mindset, as toxic as it is, one of the aspects is paying for it is cheating, because then you didn't seduce her, you didn't get one over on her, you didn't get to take sexuality from her. She got something out of the deal as well. She got paid. And to me, that's what it was. It's this kind of machismo of, he's so obsessed with how people see him that he thinks that people will think less of him if he pays for it. So he wants to say, oh, I don't need to pay for it. And Tom Cruise is doing the much more sex work positive of sure, that's okay. but refusing to think that there's anything wrong with having paid for it. But that being said, I think your perspective as well could be just as accurate. I love that as well.
There is a whole like weird dynamic where she's like, "Well, I'll be your girlfriend," and he gets jealous of his friend coming over and is like really mad that he might have slept with her, and it's like, well, you don't own her, like she is a sex worker. So they kind of they dip a toe into the ponds of like, is she my girlfriend, is she here for work, even to the point where like, so they go out after the party and literally take the bullet train to Pound Town or whatever destination that train stops at next.
I will say, having grown up in New York City, late night subway romantic encounters are not an unheard of event.
yeah. And there's like an older person who's like drinking and watching them, and they just like put him out at a certain station, and it's like, oh, okay.
So bad.
But so while they were away doing that, his whole house gets cleared out by Guido, and Guido then in what also could have been a very hilarious scene is like auctioning his home back to him, which I thought was pretty funny. And we know that Vicky was in on it, Lana's friend, but it's unclear whether Lana is.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the end that we get to, is like in that scene where they're having dinner together at the very end, where they've gotten away with it all. He asks, was it a setup? And she looks away for a long beat and then says, no. And then they just go forward and go on. What was your take on that?
Yeah, they do play her very complicated. You just don't know. I mean, she has chosen a path that she is trying to own her own success. And she's willing to steal the egg when we first meet her. That's fine by her. But she is someone who's constantly backed into a corner. I felt like that she did have something to do with it.
I thought so too.
And he is okay with it because he knows the situation she's in.
I think I had a somewhat different take on it. First of all, in terms of the egg, I guess I don't see that as stealing, because I think he has put her in such an awful position where, like, she has performed a service that she is owed money for that he can't pay for, and now he disappears. Like, if I'm her, I don't know if he's coming back with the cops. I don't know if he's coming back to actually pay me or to do something terrible to me. So to me and her, for her to be like, I'm owed money, this person is maybe trying to scam me, I'm just going to take a thing that looks valuable and leave. Like, I got no problem with her doing that. Like, technically it's stealing.
Yeah.
In terms of the setup, though, I think it's definitely left open. They did enough to show the tension between her and Guido that I'm not positive I buy that it's that she was in on it. I think what I more thought of that was, because I love the ending, and I love that it's very melancholy. It's very melancholic. Like, it's not super positive, happy. The music is very kind of sad and contemplative. I think what I got from that was that him asking that reminds her and then reminds him of how far apart they are. And that on some level, both because of the way the relationship started, but also just because of the way that he's always going to be on some level judging her, and she's always going to be on some level, feeling what she feels about him, that they're never going to be able to actually trust each other. Because on some level, if you think she is his girlfriend, him asking this is horribly offensive. Like, how could he believe that about her? But also, how could he not believe it? And to me, that was kind of the point of it, was that, like, I don't think they're together 3 years after the movie ends. I think the kind of point is, like, they had this moment together, and they're both a little, because in some ways I think it's also important. She's his age. Like, hopefully she's at least 18 or 19, but like, she's a kid in many ways as well. And I think for a little bit they're caught up in this romantic dream of, look what we just accomplished and look how good we are together. But I think whether or not she's in on it, I think that moment is all about realizing the huge gulf between the two of them, and that they're never actually really going to be able to trust each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And that he is very likely going to go on to this Princeton life, that he, like, we're unsure that he truly deeply wants it, but he's still going to do it. He's going to go to Princeton and he's going to, you know, buy his own crystal egg someday. I mean, maybe not, but I believe that he probably was. So like, this is going to be a tough one because like, there's what this movie is thematically. There's what it is filmatically. There's that whole long POV shot at the beginning. That's like really unexpected and cool. We didn't even talk about dancing in the underwear or the Mandela effect. So Nathan, do you want to say anything about the filmmaking? Because there's a lot to say. We haven't said it, I feel.
Yeah. No, I guess I don't really. I feel like this was a writer's movie, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the director, who hasn't done much directing since, really, like the writing is the strongest point, but I think it was really solidly directed. In terms of any other kind of like comments, I don't really have any.
Mm-hmm. So the other people they considered to play the role of Joel were Tom Hanks, which then this movie definitely is a slapstick comedy, and John Cusack was definitely considered, which like could have made this more of a Better Off Dead, and then also Kevin Bacon, Gary Sinise, and Sean Penn.
Huh. Well, funny to me that Sean Penn and John Cusack, since they both go on to star in the two other big 80s sex comedies we've been talking about, or non-sex comedies, Fast Times and Better Off Dead. I don't know what this movie is like if Tom Hanks is in it, but if you think about how now he has this career basically based on being this trustworthy, lovable old uncle of a white man kind of person. You know, he's often referred to as like, you know, America's most trusted person or whatever it is. I don't think he has that career if he starts out running a brothel for teenage hookers. Like, I just don't think that's the like. Maybe he still has the same career, but I feel like that would just put such a different understanding of him into Hollywood mindsets. It'd be fascinating to see.
Agree. Okay, so on a scale of like 1 crystal egg to 10 crystal eggs, what do you rate this in crystal eggs, Nathan?
It's a tough one. My gut says a 7.
Okay.
Which it's really, you know, it's not that it has any wrong moves, you know, it's just a matter of in terms of personal gravity towards the story and joy and things like that. But I think it's a very good, strong surprise.
Yeah.
You know.
And what do you think, Matthew?
So it's funny. I think judging this movie in a lot of ways comes down to sort of an age-old question that I imagine you, as watching the 80s stuff, you always have to ask, which is, how much do you forgive a movie for the time it was made? Because, like, forgive this is going to be a bit of a digression, but it's also very 80s related. In the wake of the passing of Betty White, I've been going back and watching a lot of Golden Girls episodes and realizing, like, again, I watched that as a kid, how much I missed. And that's a show where you'll have these episodes that deal with issues that in really powerful ways, really looking at things that you never would have thought of before. It's certainly not thought the 80s were talking about it, but then also still have things where you're like, oh yeah, this is an 80s show with problem. Like there's one episode where one of the characters like goes to see a mental health professional. It's a very positive, like there's nothing wrong with therapy and there's nothing wrong with going to see a therapist. And it was so good. And then they make an anti-Semitic joke about the doctor being Jewish. And you're like, oh God. And like, I love,
we were almost there.
I love the Golden Girls. I think it's a very important, very good show. I think it's also stuck in its time. And I kind of think Risky Business to me is the same way. Because like one thing we didn't even talk about with that whole scene is also the like, you know, men profiting off of the sex work of women is not something that has a very positive, like, there's a lot of societal and problems going on in that aren't discussed by the movie at all.
Yeah, he's basically replacing
Right.
her pimp.
And she's
you know,
encouraging it, but still, like,
the
if you think about
reluctant
how
pimp.
much money he profits from their work, like, yeah, okay. So, but I think I'd probably put around. I think 7 is a really good way to put it, because I think it's a dated movie in many ways. I think there's some people who would have trouble watching it. And, I mean, I don't think a person of color ever appears in the movie, except
Only
Jackie.
Jackie.
Yes, Jackie.
Yeah.
Thank you. And like, yeah, maybe there's like a waiter or something like that, but it is not.
Yeah, there's two people. There's 2 or 3 people on the subway.
I think so.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
You know, so yeah, I can understand, like, this is, I think I have a very strong identification with this movie because of my own background. So that's a big part of why I love it. And also because as a child of the 80s, I love things that are about skewering the 80s. So I would say, like, yeah, for me, I think it's a 7, maybe even an 8. But I also think that that's probably, I can very well understand why for someone else, this movie would have a very much lower rating.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so for me, I will take it one click down, and that's all, just one click down to a 6, because for me it just wasn't fun. It was good, but it wasn't fun. So if you're gonna go back and watch something from the 80s, you know, it either has to be just so incredible that you can't imagine anyone not having seen it, or so ridiculous that you have to show it to point at it and say, look how ridiculous. And this, like, it just isn't, it doesn't have his foot firmly enough in either of the camp, but it's a good movie. So that's why I can't give it a 5. I'll bump it up to a 6 because it is good, and you know, but I can't give it higher than that because it's not fun.
Yeah, that's fair.
And yeah. So, and this one was really tough too, of like, what would the deep cut recommendation be? Because like, it was just really hard to pick a way to go. So
yeah, because it is an outlier, you know, in a lot of ways.
Very much so. So what would your deep cut recommendation be, Nathan?
Well, yeah, again, I had a lot of difficulty finding one for this, but I'm gonna go with maybe one that isn't so deep, but it, you know, if you, let's say, did enjoy this movie, I gotta say, you know, The Graduate is probably the best comparison I can think of. You know, it's, if you haven't seen it, it is more surreal and abstract in a good way than you're probably imagining. You're probably imagining like a 60s version of I've got to go, you know, I've got to get I've got to score and lose my virginity. It's not that kind of story. It is someone who is very much kind of in the same situation as Tom Cruise, like just turning in terms of that anxiety, being on the precipice, and then love and sex getting involved. But it's a very cinematic movie. It's definitely worth a watch if you haven't seen it before.
That's a great one. And Matthew, what is your deep cut recommendation?
I think for me, I mean, I've mentioned them all, but I think like I would want to watch this movie and then like maybe over like a weekend or something, watch Better Off Dead, Fast Times at Richmond High, and Wall Street, because I kind of feel like all 4 of those movies are all looking at the same set of situations, just with vastly different lenses, you know? And to me, I think there's something really interesting about like looking at how do these different 80s movies with very different directors, very different perspectives, all look at this question of like young, affluent white people and the problems that they have and the ridiculousness of the problems that they have. So yeah, I think that's, I'm probably going to spend some point today watching Better Off Dead. And I don't know if you all have covered it already, but if not, sign me up for, you know, some months down the road.
We have not. Yeah, we have not. It's kind of hard to talk about movies like Better Off Dead because it's like you end up just saying like, I like this gag, I like this gag. French fries.
That's fair. It is just like a very quotable movie without too much maybe to talk about.
Oh, so quotable. So I really enjoyed Rebecca De Mornay, and like she's so known for just being like the femme fatale kind of woman. I wish she had gotten some, or would get at some point, some kind of like, I'm going to be in a completely ridiculous, Sandra Bullock type role. But my recommendation is a movie from 1993. It's The Three Musketeers that she stars. She's one of the, sort of somewhat evil, kind of in a tough position, Lady de Winter. And I don't know why, but always Three Musketeers movies are like comfort food to me. And this one has Oliver Platt, Kiefer Sutherland, and Charlie Sheen,
Yeah.
and Tim
Oh my
Curry.
God.
Tim Curry is Cardinal
The-
Richelieu.
The young guns of the
such a good
1700s.
bad
Yes,
movies.
that's precisely it. And Gabrielle Anwar and Julie Delphi, and like, it's just and who's the Chris O'Donnell at his Chris O'Donnelliest as D'Artagnan. So that's my recommendation. Like, anytime to recommend 1993's The Three Musketeers, because I think
like
it's
it.
great, but it's terrible.
Although I would just add, if you do want to see Rebecca De Mornay getting to be a fantastic actress and not in that kind of role, she's so not. She it's. I think a lot of people don't realize it's her. In the TV show Jessica Jones, she is Dorothy Walker, the mother of Jessica's best friend, who's the TV star, who's always had this mother pressuring her from a young age to push her too far. That part's played by Rebecca De Mornay, and it's one of the biggest parts of the show. It's a very important, it's brilliantly acted, and it has nothing to do with the femme fatale in this.
Oh, I did not know that. I guess I didn't finish Jessica Jones. So where can people find you, Matthew, and listen to all of your wonderful podcasts?
Sure. Well, as mentioned, I run two podcasts. One is called Superhero Ethics, where we look at kind of ethical questions from just different superhero stuff. Although it started out as superheroes, now it's pretty much anything geeky. So we cover video games, movies, TV shows. We decided that martial arts is a superpower, so we've been doing things about Cobra Kai.
Yeah.
We decided that surviving in Miami on a substitute teacher's salary is a superpower, so we did do an episode about Golden Girls. We cover everything, looking at it from a kind of an ethical standpoint. Asking questions like, should Batman kill people, or Team Cap versus Team Tony, or examining the Prime Directive in Star Trek, stuff like that. So it's a lot of fun. You all were on it for an episode we did on Spider-Man. That was a lot of fun. We have a lot of great things going on. We're currently doing a look back at a lot of the old 80s movies, a lot of the old Batman movies, which are from the 80s originally, some of the first ones, in preparation for the new Batman movie. And then the other podcast I host is called the Star Wars Universe Podcast, and that's more of a kind of like, we do reviews of different Star Wars properties. We're right now doing episode by episode of Book of Boba Fett. We're also in the middle of doing episode by episode of Star Wars Rebels. And that's not explicitly an ethics show by any means, but we do take more of a, that's not a show where we're going to go into telling you like the exact names of every droids and every piece of hardware because we looked it up. We've all memorized the Star Wars encyclopedia. We're going to get much more into characters and the story and the Force and all that the kind of more philosophical sides of things. So you can check out both of those podcasts, and you can find those as well as some of the others I guest on by going to theethicalpanda.com. That's our website, and there also you'll find our Facebook, our Twitter, all the ways to find us on social media.
Wonderful.
Cool.
Where can people find you, Nathan? And if they want to give you a bunch of money to do the second half of the last movie ever made, how can they do that?
Well, the best way to kind of find my stuff is through Squishy Studios. So squishystudios.com, or our page on Facebook, and our movies and contact information, all sorts of that stuff is on there.
Wonderful. Find everything. Oh, you can find me, the human person in real life, at the Neighborhood Comedy Theater if you are in the East Valley, Greater Phoenix area of the state of Arizona. If not, you can find me in the interwebs at NCTPHX or at Most Excellent Krissy. And you can find Most Excellent Pod at Most Excellent Pod. We're so very excited to have you listen with us. Thank you for being a friend, just to tie it into all the Golden Girls mentioned. We really appreciate you. And of course, now's the time at the end of the podcast where I'm like, please like and rate and review. What words do I pronounce that you don't care for? Let us know. We appreciate it, and we appreciate you. So while you're out there in the world, please do remember to keep the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast motto in mind. Be excellent to each other. And
Party on, dudes.
Party on.
Party on, dudes.
Party on. And that's it. Yay!